Hello, Aries. This is a forecast for Aries rising and or moon sign for December 2022. So Aries, Mars, your ruling planet, is continuing to retrograde through your second host sign, Taurus. This is all about family, resources, values, and it will meet with the moon for the full moon on December 8th, opposite the sun. So when you have Sun and Mars opposite each other, that is the midpoint in the whole retrograde cycle. And because it's full moon and exactly conjunct Mars in your second sign, there are a lot of issues that are probably coming to a head now for you, Aries, around family, finances, and values. And ultimately, it's about what you value and what you place value on. And it's also about your own value for your own self-worth. So as Mars continues to retrograde, although this is like a midpoint, it is only the midpoint. And so you still have until mid-January to process and reassess all of that. There obviously is the continuation of Rahu and Uranus continuing to transit through your sign in Aries. This is asking so much of you, asking you to be something else, to see yourself differently, to put on maybe other roles, to put on other masks as well, perhaps with Rahu, to try on other garbs for a while, to play these certain roles. And Rahu, like I said, can ask a lot of you, or you ask a lot of yourself. And that's what the transit of Rahu can often show. And to be mindful of that as well, to get more balance in your life, that you don't overdo anything, that you don't go too far in any way. Uranus always about surprises and also about freedom and freedom of movement and expression. Combined with Mars's retrograde, it's possibly a bit tricky because Mars itself retrograde doesn't have a clear outlet for expression in the second house necessarily, and so you might end up biting your lip a lot. But at the same time, you can experience your own sense of freedom in your own self, and trying out different things for yourself, and maybe even presenting yourself in a different way, especially if this is your rising sign, Aries. If this is your moon sign or other planets here, of course, it's all due a shakeup. But rising sign in particular, you might literally be going through that like as a physical phenomenon. Saturn continues throughout December, but only for another few weeks. This is the last full month of Saturn in Capricorn. And for you, Aries, that's your 10th whole sign. So it's all about work. And as it finishes out in Capricorn in the next few weeks and keeps a close eye on Jupiter in Pisces, which is now moving forward in December, there is this sense of, doing things, in a way that is like more sustainable for sure, keeping an eye on the bigger picture, looking at what you need to let go of now, which is very much about Jupiter in the 12th house, being clear about that as well, understanding what needs to be let go of, understanding your financial situation, especially because of the 10th house, the 12th house being impacted along with the second, and also more recently and continually this 8th house aspect. So 8th house is very much about other people's money and other people's values and resources. And the sun continues to transit through here for the first couple of weeks of the month. Venus and Mercury are about done with it by the beginning of December, and they're about to move into Sagittarius. And I'll show you that new moon as well by the time we get a new moon in Sagittarius by the end of December, on December 23rd, right before Christmas. So this transition now from your 8th sign Scorpio to the 9th sign Sagittarius is thinking about your worst fears in a way, thinking about what is the worst that could happen, thinking about all the unexpected changes that you've been going through and things that are outside of your control, and now moving to a more hopeful space throughout December, or in December at least, there is this probable sense of transition from thinking the worst to hoping for the best. That's the transition from Scorpio to Sagittarius. So that's the overall picture for December. Let me show you the major lunations. So the first one we have is on December 8th, which is the full moon. And it's exactly conjunct Mars at 21 degrees with the sun at 21 degrees here. I cannot show you that exactly in this chart here because it will move the ascendant. So just to give you an eye on your ascendant from Aries perspective, it's the second sign moon with the sun in the 8th sign. So again, it's all about finances, resources, values, yours and others, and having to come to a sort of agreement here, or a balance, a negotiation with Mars retrograde conjunct the moon. So this is an important theme here for this full moon anyway, for everybody. But for you, Aries, is very specifically that. How do you find balance between what you find important, what you value, and what other people value, including your partner or any other? And so this is a time to find that balance. And it's obviously a full moon, it's in a culmination point. There's this kind of thing, something coming to a resolution as well, most likely. So having to come to some sort of resolution around finances, for example, the last new moon was in your eighth house, in the eighth sign, Scorpio. And that is very much about maybe, having to deal with unexpected things or dealing with other people's things, other people's values or resources or money. And now it's this kind of resolution around your own sense of self and self-worth, around your own earning and your own earning capability as well. So that's the full moon on the 8th. If we bring it forward 2 weeks later, then there's the new moon on the 23rd. It's at 7 degrees of sidereal Sagittarius. So if I bring it back to your rising sign Aries, you'll see that it's the whole ninth sign. And so this ninth house, this transition now, as the sun now has moved into Sagittarius from mid-December, Venus and Mercury have already moved through here for most of the month of December, and they're actually already going to be preparing to move into Capricorn. It really is emphasizing ninth sign. And again, generally for the world, that's really emphasizing what beliefs we hold and connecting to something more meaningful at this time of year leading up to Christmas. But for you, Aries, this is very specifically the theme, like looking at what you believe, what you think is possible also. And maybe with this new moon in your ninth sign, in the root star sign Mula at the very beginning of Sagittarius, this is literally where we can see from our vantage point the galactic center, the black hole, at the center of our galaxy. This is very much about our origins. And so this is like an origin story and about your origin story and how you have your stories and where do they originate from? Where do your beliefs come from anyway? So this new moon in this sign for you, Aries, this is a special time of year to really connect with your story, your roots, your family roots, or your cosmic roots, even, if you will, your spiritual connection, as it were. So that is the new moon on the 23rd. You can see here Saturn is about finished with your 10th sign after nearly 3 years in the sign since January 2020. So you will probably be relieved when it moves from your 10th house, as it's changed it forevermore, i.e. your work. And so whatever has had to be relinquished during this period can then further progress into January and the following few years as Saturn moves into Aquarius, which I'll talk about in January. That's a January transit. And Jupiter is now moving forward as well, and that will then ultimately signal its transit into your own sign by next spring in April. And so that's another big transition that's happening. So a lot of key things that are happening in December are more positive, I would say, overall, Aries. And, for you, especially moving from this eighth house activation in a big way to the ninth house, again, something more hopeful. So I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. Hello, Taurus. This is a forecast for Taurus rising and or moon sign for December 2022. So Taurus, your ruling planet Venus has been moving through Scorpio, exchanging with Mars in your sign. And this continues just for the first few days of the month because Venus will actually step into Sagittarius by the 5th of December. And for really the most of the rest of the month until the 29th of December. So it moves out of this sort of cooperative exchange between your sign and your seventh, you and any other, whether it's a partner, a relationship of any kind, or any other, really. This kind of compromise that was obviously your experience up until now is moving into something else and possibly moving into something a bit more, I would say, of a challenge, but it doesn't mean that you cannot rise to the occasion and, challenge yourself also. And if I just show you that, when we first see on the 5th, Venus move across this juncture between Scorpio and Sagittarius, It's a bit of a tricky juncture to say the least because it's moving from the depths of Scorpio and the heights of our fears and anxieties to the more hopeful Sagittarius. But we don't do that overnight, and we don't do it necessarily in an easy way. We normally go through it overnight many times when we have this kind of doom and gloom, wake up at like, early hours of the morning in this kind of sense of dread that is quite common for people to experience. um, that kind of transition is important to acknowledge the first week of December for you, Taurus. So this change that's happening within you and this need now to go into a different space to think more hopefully about things, even when things are changing, and actually to even view change as an unexpected as it might be around this time as welcome change and offering this new hope. That's the eighth sign, basically. Of course, we many times astrologers pin a lot of negative words on the eighth house, but it can often show this kind of going beyond our fears in a way and transcending. And it's one of the signs that are called moksha in Indian astrology. So it's about liberation ultimately. It's about liberating us from our fears. So, of course, with your ruling planet moving into the sign, with Mars continuing to retrograde in your sign, aspecting. So, Mars is said to have this eighth house aspect from itself. So, it will continue to influence your sign, your ruler, Venus, in your eighth sign, and it will really ask you to really challenge yourself to kind of go beyond your fears and to make some changes, some key changes here in your life. And ultimately by the end of December on the 23rd, this is where we have the new moon in Sagittarius in your eighth sign. So there's this need to kind of reset everything at the end of this year and then make some of these changes into the new year. So let me bring it forward first of all, and I want to show you the first major lunation, which is the full moon. Let me go back. It's on the 8th. If I show you here, the 8th of December, we have a full moon in your sign. So now it's not just a full moon in your sign, which means the sun is opposite. So it's about you finding again this balance between yourself and the other, your own desires versus other people's, finding a balance in home life as well, of course, with the sun, your fourth ruler. And the third is very much about you going for something you want. So there's some home type of issue going on here, some issue around happiness. If your mother is still alive, maybe there's a something playing out there in December and around this full moon on the 8th. But it's also combined with relationship issues and more hidden dynamics because of Mars and Mars retrograde exactly conjunct the full moon at 21 degrees of Taurus on the 8th of December. So this is a time to really be mindful of using this energy, this resolution, this culmination of the full moon in a way that's more helpful and not so destructive, because Mars is retrograde and it's important to channel this energy in some way that's more productive, not as reactive, but maybe more responsive to what is happening. This is the midpoint of Mars's retrograde when it meets with the moon because it's exactly opposite the sun. And so although it's the midpoint, it's just the midpoint. It's you're halfway there, right? And so it's very important in terms of any relationship dynamics and any kind of thing that you're dealing with other people with, that you have patience at this point. Because oftentimes with these planetary transits, we initially might feel it, but then we think it's going to move on. And then when they stick for much longer, like a retrograde cycle of Mars, which lasts some weeks, we kind of can get more and more frustrated as the weeks go on if you're not mindful of it. And so again, finding an outlet and not allowing it to build up into this kind of frustration or angst that could lead to problems or even accidents. It's important that you find an outlet in some way that kind of lets off some steam, basically. And especially if this were a relationship issue, that you don't just bite your lip the whole time and don't say anything, that you eventually sort of learn how to deal with the other person in a more productive manner and respond appropriately, I would say. So that's the full moon and an important time to consider these kinds of themes, I would say. So let's move it forward and we see how the month pans out. We've got Venus, your ruler, and Mercury both moving through Sagittarius. They're starting to break up now because Mercury's a faster mover. They'll come back together though by the end of the month because Mercury's going to start slowing down and begin to retrograde. So this kind of on-off kind of jostle between Mercury and Venus is continuing really in December as well. We had this in November. So, but the difference is in December, Again, it's in your 8th house. So it's about dealing with maybe joint finances or joint values with your partner or with other people, as opposed to dealing with the other person. So that's the Venus Mercury. Let me show you now the new moon. It's on the 23rd, a couple of days before Christmas. Mars is aspecting. It's in Jupiter's sign, Sagittarius. It's your 8th sign. So you have the sun and moon at 7 degrees for the new moon. Your ruler Venus in the same sign with Mercury at the very end of the sign, slowing down now and again preparing to retrograde from the end of December. And so this is a time to be very mindful of unexpected changes at this point, perhaps, and to set your intentions around what kind of outcomes that you would like to see. And as much as you can, again, respond appropriately to what changes are happening, and see them as more positive changes, not just to see them as unwelcome. You see them as more positive changes, and that will help you sort of reset your intentions around what is happening and what must happen, of course, because the 8th house is very much, or feels many times very much outside of our control, but really we're doing it all on some level. And the fact that Jupiter, which is now moving forward, is moving forward in your 12th, in your 11th sign, and that's very much about moving forward with higher goals, bigger ambitions, and bigger dreams, and really connecting with those again and being more clear and hopeful about them moving forward. And this new moon, just as the last new moon in November, November 23rd, this December 23rd new moon is kind of continuing that theme of, where do I find hope in my life? Where do I find this sense of connection and meaning and purpose? And looking at that to give you that sense of clarity and moving forward and seeing that light on the horizon. So that's the new moon, an important new moon for sure, an important reset in your life and moving forward. And so I hope you got something from that, Taurus. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. Hello, Gemini. This is a forecast for Gemini rising and or moon sign for December 2022. So Gemini, your ruler Mercury is moving through Scorpio for just the first few days of December. It's about to move out of Scorpio, your 6th sign, which might itself have been a bit of a challenge. And on the 3rd of December, it's going to move into your 7th sign. Now, there are a few other things happening because Venus will follow it closely behind on the 5th, and that will move out of that exchange between Venus and Mars between your 6th and 12th signs. So there's this, I imagine, in the last few weeks, this need that you've had to overcome some challenge, and yet at the same time, this ability to do so. Now that it's moving into your 7th house along with Venus, Mercury, Venus in your 7th house, as Mars continues to retrograde in your 12th house, it's important that you, once you've dealt with the challenge, that you understand how that impacts other people, understand how you impact other people in general, and focusing on other people, focusing your energy there, because what's going to happen by the end of December is that Mercury will, first of all, move through the 7th sign of relationships throughout December, slow down by the end of the month, very briefly peek its head into the 8th sign Capricorn, and then retrograde from the 29th. And then by the last day of the year, it's going to go back into your 7th sign. And so you're really starting the new year, ending the year and starting the new year with this theme of really looking at other people and how you impact other people, and looking at what you want from other people, what would make you happy in a relationship as well, or from your partner, and reassessing that into the new year is going to be a big part of that. So that's kind of just like a heads up, really more so for the new year. Really for December, it's about kind of setting the playing field for that. And maybe that you're getting ahead of things, or your partners are getting ahead of things, ahead of circumstances, as Mercury pulls away from the sun. And then you obviously then have to, you know, experience this kind of snapback in a way, this kind of reassessment and review if things have got, too ahead of yourself, ahead of circumstances. So considering, your home life, your relationships, and all of these things in December will be important, because in the new year, like I said, there's a major review starting out the new year in how you relate. And um, thinking about these more personable kind of areas of your life is going to be important. And especially after November's challenge, you might say, with, Mars retrograde and Venus opposite with Mercury here in Scorpio, you might have felt a lot of kind of, uh, dealing with some issues, some blocks yourself personally. And now it's about dealing with other people and how you deal with other people more effectively. So let me first show you the first major lunation. Actually, first, let me show you on the 3rd how Mercury moves into your 7th sign and continues to move through there for most of the month. And then a couple of days later, Venus moves into your 7th sign. And then a couple of weeks later, or over a week later, we have the Sun always move into a new sign by mid-month. So by the 16th of December, the Sun has moved from your 6th into your 7th. So at least it takes all of this attention away from the 6th house and problems and conflicts, or inner conflicts as much as outer. And then it moves into this again relationship space, especially by mid-month. So you're going to feel that more and more. And of course, as Mercury and Venus both sort of straddle, the same degree for most of the end of November into December, they start to pull away in December, but then they come back together by the end of December because Mercury's slowing down and retrograding from the end of the month. So it's a kind of like dance between these two planets a lot of the time. Again, it's very much about you and the other and all of that, and what you would love in the other and from the other, and what you need to compromise. And that's more especially heightened by the fact that Mars is retrograde in your 12th house, Taurus, Venus's sign, and looking on, aspecting these planets here in Sagittarius. So Mars has a big role to play in this. And let me bring it back because I actually skipped over a really important point here, which is the 8th of December and the full moon, because this is where a lot of these things are sort of coming to a head in many ways. It's a full moon, but it's also a full moon exactly conjunct Mars, this retrograde Mars, which is now exactly opposite the sun for the full moon. And this is a midway point, therefore, in the Mars retrograde. And as a midpoint, it is a kind of culmination, but it's only halfway through it. And so there's a need to address any kind of Mars type issues now, as Mars again continues to influence your ruler Mercury, aspecting the 8th sign and all of that. And thinking about Mars in the 12th house and its aspect on your 7th sign, is understanding where you might feel a bit perturbed or feeling a bit of angst, and that how that you might not be clear about where that's coming from, or why that's happening, why somebody's pushing your buttons, and understanding how you might be able to negotiate more throughout this whole Mars retrograde cycle and continuing until mid-January. And, dealing with any frustrations as well, because Mars continues to retrograde into the new year, along with now your Mercury, which is about to station retrograde at the end of the year into the new year. Really, it's about dealing with frustrations and setbacks. And so it's not really the kind of new year period to sort of be all gung ho about starting something new and going full blazing, guns blazing ahead, right? It's not really about that. January is a very much a slow down, reassess everything kind of month. And December is setting the stage for that. So while you might get ahead of yourself in December, January is going to sort of snap everything back into place and get you to retreat a bit and review and reassess everything. So be mindful of those kind of frustrations that build up, and especially around this full moon in your 12th house on the 8th of December, conjunct Mars retrograde. Again, this midpoint in Mars. So let's bring it forward and we see how all of this pans out as the moon then begins to wane. And we're going to have a new moon in your 7th sign by the 23rd of December. So the 23rd of December is the new moon in Sagittarius in the lunar mansion Mula, the root star sign. It's literally what Mula means. And so it's all about going back to roots. And this is oftentimes the case around Christmas anyway. We go back to our family roots and we go back to our roots, even from a more religious or cosmic point of view. But for you, it's about relationship more so. And especially because Mercury is really focusing here, and Venus and Sun, Moon, all here in your 7th house, focusing on other people and focusing on relationships. So the fact that, again, remember, Mercury is going to go retrograde over this point, this whole area again, thinking about that into the new year and reassessing how you relate in general will be an important one. And again, with Mars's aspect, again, on this new moon, it's important to think about anything that's sabotaging you and your ability to relate more harmoniously with other people. Jupiter, which rules the new moon, has now started to move forward. So that's a positive thing. So there's a sense of momentum moving forward here, perhaps in your career, perhaps in your visibility as well, connecting with something more meaningful and purposeful in your life, with Jupiter moving forward in your 10th house. So this new moon in your 7th house is certainly an opportunity to kind of reset some intentions around that as well. Your relationships, your career, understanding the blocks that might be there in either of those things and finding that you have this more meaningful connection to something that you're doing. 10th house. So this is also, just to mention before I wrap it up, Mars's last full month, or sorry, pardon me, Saturn's full month in Capricorn. Saturn has been in Capricorn since January 2020. So it's going to finish out this transit in January 2023 and move into your ninth sign. And it has not been likely the easiest time for you, especially if this is your moon sign, Gemini. If it's your rising sign, either. But when you have Saturn in the eighth from anything, it's going to challenge that thing to change. And Saturn in the eighth house is often changes that we just don't want to make or that are outside of our control, especially bigger changes that are happening in the world around you, perhaps. That's Saturn in the eighth in Capricorn. Systems changing, like systematic changes in your life as well. Like everything in your life has a system that runs everything, right? You've got your routines and systems that keep everything secure. And Saturn in the eighth conjunct Pluto, especially in 2020, 2021, more especially, has been a challenge. But now you can at least acknowledge the end of this cycle as it starts to move on and into the new year in January. As although there are a lot of things to reassess here and be slow into the new year, there are things progressing in January and into 2023 that just have not progressed in a while. So Saturn now moving into your ninth house from your eighth house is about moving beyond all your fears and all the fears of, the world around you, and you're maybe being subjected to, and thinking about what it is you truly believe and what is important to you, and connecting with that once more, and being more clear about that. And that's Saturn's transit into your ninth house. I'll talk more about that in January, of course. It's a big transit to talk about for all the signs. And so for now, I hope that's been helpful, Gemini. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. Hello, Cancer. This is a forecast for Cancer rising and or moon sign for December 2022. So Cancer, Mars continues to retrograde through your 11th sign, and the moon, your ruler, will join it on the 8th of December for a full moon. So that means the moon, of course, is opposite your sun, the sun, in your 5th sign. And not only that, it's an exact conjunction of the moon and Mars at 21 degrees of Taurus with the sun at 21 degrees of Scorpio for this full moon. So this is very much about the midpoint in this whole journey of Mars retrograde, and understanding your input here, and understanding these houses, especially the 11th house and the 5th house, and finding a balance between these two. These two are very much about your loves, your desires, and your need for planning something in your future. You're thinking about things that give you a sense of power. When you think about fifth house, whether it's connecting with your spiritual practices or with your children or your creative self-expression, also thinking about how that has an impact on your group, your friends, your society, even your community around you, at least. The 11th sign, thinking about friendships and possibly thinking about your, bigger ambitions as well in life, and how Mars retrograde can really frustrate and halt those and create these setbacks that are, frustrating. So with a full moon conjunct Mars exactly in your 11th house of ambition, thinking about how you can reconnect with what your heart desires, what you truly want, and what you truly, or who you truly love. And this kind of whole juxtaposed position between the sun and moon now is like, who's a friend and who's a lover? Who's potentially a friend or lover? And what is the distinction between both, of course, and all of that? But also, again, whether it's a relationship with anyone, or, thinking about your children as your love, your beloved, right? A beloved doesn't have to be a partner always. It could be a child. It could be a thing that you're working on, a project that you have, a creative thing that you do that you just love dearly. That is, you could say, your beloved. So that's very much the theme of this full moon, and it's because it's in Rohini, which is a very sort of Rohini very much means growth, and it's a very nurturing lunar mansion where the full moon is, and it's again because it's the 11th sign of your chart, very much about what you would like to grow and expand on, and what themes you would like to grow, and the comforts that you wish to have in your life, and the enjoyments that you wish to have. So of course, a full moon, but again, exactly conjunct Mars is an important time to engage with those, but to, not get frustrated if it's not working out as you planned. that there is some need to kind of go back over how you're doing this, how you're approaching it, how you're making it happen. Especially with relationships in terms of, for example, with children, like this Mars retrograde could really lead to kind of a lot of frustration. Maybe it's your child that's lashing out, and maybe you're having to deal with that. That's the full moon conjunct Mars retrograde. So that is the full moon on the 8th of December. Let's move it forward and we'll see how other changes take place throughout the month. First of all, to note that the first week of December, before that full moon, we have Venus moving in with Mercury into your 6th sign, and the sun will join them by mid-month. The sun always moves into Sagittarius by the 16th of December. Remember, these are sidereal signs. So, Cancer, this is your 6th sign. So you're moving from that 5th house, which is again the thing you love to do, the person you love, into the 6th sign, where we'll have the new moon by the 23rd of December. And that reset point around how do you go about making this happen? How do you go about working towards those things or working for those things? And if you don't truly love it, then you're not likely to. But if you truly love a child, of course, you'll do anything for the child. If you truly love something or someone, you'll do anything for them. And that's the 6th sign. And it's really emphasizing the 6th sign in December and how do you go about step by step doing something that you love and planning something you love and doing it every day. And 6th sign is all about our habits, our daily habits, our regimes, our routines, our work habits, our health habits. All of these things, thinking about how you approach these will be important in December. Throughout the month, really, but again, with the sun moving in here by mid-month, we'll emphasize this all the more leading up to the new moon. So here's the new moon. It's on the 23rd. It's in your 6th sign. It's very much a reset in terms of how you do anything daily. How do you function on a day-to-day basis? Thinking about, again, why you do anything, and then that will give you that impetus to sort of move through those steps, which sometimes can maybe create some challenge, and especially when you think about Mars retrograde and it has an eye on all of this in Sagittarius as it continues to retrograde, and dealing with any frustration that can build up if things aren't working out the way you would like, if there's any work issues here, because Mars is your 10th lord and this is all happening in your 6th house with Mars looking on. Like if you're frustrated about anything you would love to do and it's not working out the way you want, just at this stage, Cancer, to be mindful of that and finding an outlet for Mars in some way, maybe having some routine to kind of blow off some steam, um, all of that. Now, this new moon on the 23rd, right before Christmas, is a really important time to kind of really set your intentions about what, changes need to be made in your life. And again, on a day-to-day basis. And because Jupiter, which rules this new moon itself, is very strong in Pisces in your 9th sign, aspecting your sign, this is a good time to really reconnect with what gives your life meaning and purpose and moving forward with those higher minded things, you might say, keeping an eye on those as much as the kind of everyday problems that might rear their heads at this stage, the kind of daily stresses and strains that could obviously, take their toll. But really thinking about those higher minded things can really give you more perspective. And so you don't get too bogged down in the details. You keep that hope alive, you keep that dream alive, right? And you don't get frustrated with any setbacks that might be apparent. Now, the fact that all of these planets are kind of leading to and adding to this kind of sense of review in the new year, because Mars continues to retrograde into January, but also Mercury will join it in retrograde motion, because Mercury will actually station on the 29th, and it will actually move back by the very end of the year, but the last day of December, back into Sagittarius. So really December is setting the stage really as planets move through your 6th sign, and then Mercury goes back in by the end of the month and into the new year, really setting the stage for having a big review in how you work, basically, Cancer. So thinking about how your life works or not, and you might have to reschedule things, you might have to reassess some things that you do, and that's more so in January. December is setting the stage. So, Cancer, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. Hello, Leo. This is a forecast for Leo rising and or moon sign for December 2022. So, Leo, the ruler of your sign, the sun, is continuing to move through Scorpio for the first couple of weeks of December, and then we'll move into Sagittarius. This is the sidereal zodiac, remember? So by December 16th, it'll move into Sagittarius, your fifth sign. So, really emphasizing these really deep, important aspects of your life, the fourth and fifth houses. This is what makes you happy, what you love. And, when you're happy and settled and secure in yourself, which is the fourth sign, you're more expressive and able to express that love, which is the fifth sign. So the fifth sign is kind of also more future orientated. And so thinking about making plans for the future as well will be a big theme of this transition into December. And of course, it's a transition into the end of the year and into the new year anyway. So for you, Leo, you might be thinking more ahead in that sense. Now, just a kind of heads up in that sense, because what happens in December is setting the stage for January, where by January, Mercury, which has moved through your fourth house and through your fifth house in December, will go back into your fifth house by the end of December as it retrogrades. So I'll show you that now in a moment, but basically it's a sort of setting the stage for the big review in January and reviewing your plans for the future in a big way. And the fact that Mars is continued to retrograde and looks on at these planets in Scorpio and continues to look on at the planets as they move into Sagittarius, your fourth and fifth house, from its vantage point in your 10th house, your work, retrograde. It's really asking you to reassess how you do things, how you work, what you want to work at. Actually, even there might be even bigger changes that are happening in your job. Like it could be a change of job, but at least a change in how you do your job and what you want to do with your work, what you would love to do. And thinking about these things, especially into the new year with Mercury then retrograding, also, it'll be very much about how do you go about making these things happen. So first of all, I want to show you Mercury move on the 3rd of December from your 4th into the 5th. And then a couple of days later, Venus moves in. And then a few days after that, or 10 days or so after that, your ruler, the sun, moves in. So it's really emphasizing this shift from the 4th home life into more, again, more creative space, thinking about your future. Before any of that, though, we have a full moon on the 8th at 21 degrees of Taurus, exactly opposite 21 degrees of Scorpio. This is a full moon exactly conjunct Mars. And so this is the midpoint in the Mars retrograde cycle. Now, for you, Leo, this is again potentially frustrating. So, being very mindful of that because it's not just Mars retrograde in your 10th house. Mars is aspecting or looking at or influencing strongly your house, your first sign, Leo. And so, it's kind of like Mars can be a bit angsty, a bit frustrated when it's retrograde anyway. But when it aspects your sign, you might feel it in a big way. And it's in your 10th sign of work or any kind of actions that you're taking. And you're being really called to look at the reactions that this is provoking in you and thinking about how perhaps instead of reacting strongly, you can think about how you can respond appropriately and how you can find ways of allowing this energy some expression. So if you don't, the problem with that is that Mars can often represent accidents because there's a buildup of all this energy, but it doesn't have an obvious outlet. And then all of a sudden you're having these kind of smaller accidents, perhaps that lead to like bigger ones, because it's just about drawing your attention into that inner energy in a way with Mars retrograde and how you do things. And that energy of thinking about frustration or anger or irritability, even, what is that all about? I mean, it's asking you to really look at that and what's important here, because there obviously is something important here. So for this full moon, exactly conjunct Mars on the 8th of December in your 10th house, opposite your sun, your ruler in the 4th house, there's obviously some important themes going on here between your work-life balance, finding that balance and, thinking about how you approach things and how you could maybe approach it differently and find more balance, find a resolution. That's the full moon always. The theme of the full moon is about finding some resolution. So that's the full moon on the 8th of December. If I draw it down as we bring the moon down into its waning cycle, we have the sun on the 16th move into Sagittarius, your fifth sign. This is certainly after the 17th, as the sun settles in, a more positive, more hopeful situation. Jupiter itself continues to move forward throughout December and throughout really the first few months of 2023 in Pisces, its own sign. And although this is your 8th sign, so there's some changes that are happening possibly, but there is also a great benefit for you to really, really connect with something more meaningful and purposeful in your life, and to heal a lot of things in your life as well. That's the 8th sign. So it's a very healing time for you. And when we add this to a new moon in your 5th sign, which is ruled by Jupiter, and I'll show you that here, that's on the 23rd in Sagittarius. This is a time to heal. And because the 5th and the 8th sign are very much again about the future, it's about what you would like to do in the future. You can only see a more hopeful future if you can overcome some problems in your present. And so really, I suppose this theme of planning your future into this end of the year, into the new year, is a big one for you, Leo. Overcoming anything that you can see that more hopeful future for yourself and for everyone around you and your family and your children, perhaps if you have children, but for everybody. So that is the new moon. It's an important reset point. It's at 7 degrees of Sagittarius. That's sidereal signs, and it's in the lunar mansion Mula, the root star sign. It's very much about connecting with your roots as well. And when you connect with your roots as well, it's important to bring that into your space in terms of a more personable place. It's not just about this abstract idea. It's more about a very personal thing for you. And because again, 5th sign is very much about children, maybe, bringing your children along, and for many people, Christmas time, especially the holidays, is like the first time that, children are brought into the family house, and the grandparents and the children all come together. This is very much about this kind of reconnecting with your roots. But all of that to say that, the 5th house is also very future orientated. It's about looking to the future generations. And that's what the children are, of course. And looking to your future, even if you don't have children, it's the same thing. It's like looking to your future. How do you connect with that deep sense of rootedness in yourself and your own family origins and your own even cosmic origins, while then using that to kind of propel you forward for this new moon on the 23rd. So by the end of the year, then, like I said, Mercury will just slightly move into Capricorn. It's not going to do so for very long because it was stationed on the 29th, and then a couple of days later on New Year's Eve, will return to Sagittarius. And in January, will continue to retrograde with the sun here. So obviously, a huge emphasis on your children, on your creativity, on your future plans, and on the things that you do that you really devote yourself to on a daily basis as well. And how does that impact you? And how does it give you a sense of strength? And so that's a big theme moving into January, and I'll talk more about that in the new year. But for now, I hope that's been of help, Leo. And as always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. Hello, Virgo. This is a forecast for Virgo rising and our moon sign for December 2022. So, Virgo, Mercury, your ruler, has been moving through your 3rd sign opposite Mars, where Venus and the Sun have joined Mercury in Scorpio. Now, this is not necessarily the easiest combination in many ways. It's a challenge, and it's asking you to rise to the challenge, and has been for the last few weeks. But there's a shift that's happening now as Mercury then moves into your 4th sign, and that actually happens quite quickly in December, on the 3rd of December. So Mercury moves into Sagittarius and crosses this juncture between Scorpio and Sagittarius, which itself is, somewhat of a no man's land in a way. It kind of is a very uncertain time where you're not clear about, well, first of all, 3rd house is about how do I communicate clearly and effectively in this kind of space where I'm feeling maybe more emotional. Mercury in Scorpio in your 3rd, while at the same time I might be feeling frustrated because Mars, its ruler, is opposite, retrograde. And how do I negotiate all of these different things with Venus and Mars exchanging? So it's again been maybe a challenge for you to overcome anything here and to build confidence in your ability to be clear and communicate something that you want, while there is a lot of frustration and setbacks possibly in getting what you want and seeing a potential or possibility here. But now that the planets are about to move from your 3rd into your 4th, it's about, well, what do you want anyway? What would make you happy? So the Mercury, like I said, moves in on the 3rd, and by the 5th, Venus moves in, and by mid-month on the 16th, the Sun will move in. So it's really shifting all this awareness now from your 3rd and looking at your own ability to get something and your own egoic needs in a way to grab something for yourself, to really, what do I want, and what would make me happy? That's fourth sign. And maybe just settling a bit more in December at home, which is another thing of fourth sign. And in a way, this is kind of setting the stage for January as well, because by January, Mercury will backtrack over this section of the zodiac. It will move through your fourth sign in December and get ahead of the game in a way, get ahead of circumstances, ahead of the sun. So you might be getting ahead of things and planning ahead and all of these things. But then in January, you're having to go back over things and reassess things in your home life. And again, in reassessing what makes you happy ultimately and who makes you happy. Before then, though, before any of that, we have the full moon on the 8th of December. This is a full moon exactly conjunct Mars at 21 degrees. Now, and it means that Mars then is exactly opposite the sun. So it's the midpoint of the Mars retrograde cycle. And so it's only the midpoint, but it's the culmination point. It's the halfway point. Things have reached ahead now, and it's a full moon, and that's itself a culmination point. So there's this kind of need to kind of really resolve some key issues here around, again, what you believe is possible and any kind of issues that you have here about, not being able to see that, not being able to hear that also, and communicating that more effectively to yourself, being clear about it with yourself so that you can communicate that effectively with other people. That's this full moon in your ninth sign with the sun opposite in your third sign, and finding a balance between the two considerations here, where there's something that you believe, but then there's this opinion that you have as well. And where do your opinions or beliefs come from anyway? Why do I have that belief? Why do I have that thought? Where does that thought come from? And to really question really whether that's true or not is another good thing to do here for the full moon in your ninth sign, conjunct Mars, a retrograde Mars. So not getting frustrated by any of it, but just being, curious about it and wanting to delve into where does that thought come from? Where does that belief come from? And does that belief serve me, in fact? And might I be better off by reassessing or reviewing that belief? And so this is another theme for this full moon for you, Virgo. Let me draw it forward and we'll see how this pans out for the rest of the month as the moon then starts to wane, starts to reduce in its brightness. And then we'll meet with the sun's degree on the 23rd in your fourth sign. Mars continues to retrograde throughout this whole period, of course, and it, continues to actually influence all these planets as they move through Sagittarius in your fourth sign. So looking at your home life and any kind of frustrations that might be expressed here, um, and again, especially around this new moon, as all of these things kind of come together, the sun and moon come together at least at 7 degrees of Sagittarius, and really ask you to really reset some intentions here around what it is that would make you happy going forward. And to think about how you're reconnecting with your family roots as well, especially because this is literally happening in the root star sign called Mula, meaning root. And because it's happening in your home life, and obviously this is right before Christmas, it might be good to reconnect with family roots. And doing so in terms of what makes you happy as well. Like, would it make you happy to reconnect with those people? Would it make you happy to reconnect with something deep within yourself? Is it just about the external things, the home situation, or is it more internal? Is it more an inside job, really? With the new moon, it's very much an internal thing. It's about reconnecting and reassessing and reviewing that as well. Because again, remember that Mercury will return here and go retrograde here in January. And so once you have that kind of connection once more, that family or home connection, and possibly even reassessing your home life, as in where you're living, like possibly changing your home in January, might be a good time for like a really refurbishment and clear out of your home in the new year. But again, leading up to that, because December is like setting the stage for that subsequently. So that's the new moon on the 23rd. Let me show you Mercury as it does this thing in and out of your fourth, fifth house. So it goes into your fifth house on the 28th, but it doesn't stay long. It's going to station on the 29th. And then it will move back on New Year's Eve into your fourth house. So it barely peeks into your fifth house, really. But, again, this is a time to slow down, pay attention to Mercury retrograde. I would certainly not advise traveling around New Year's Eve because it would be probably a chaotic time to travel with Mercury retrograde along with Mars retrograde. But if you do have to travel, just pack a lot of patience with you. And again, a lot of patience is required into the new year anyway, as you reassess your whole life in terms of your home life and your whole direction in life in every which way, really. So, Virgo, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. Hello, Libra. This is a forecast for Libra rising and or moon sign for December 2022. So, Libra, your ruler Venus is finishing up in Scorpio and its exchange with Mars in Taurus, which is retrograde. And this has been probably a little bit tricky for you in compromising with your partner or with any other, especially around financial concerns or family dynamics and values. And so this exchange between the second and eighth houses now is breaking up, as Venus on the 5th of December will move into your third sign, along with Mercury, which moves in on the 3rd. So here we have your ruler and Mercury both sort of dancing along together in Scorpio and then again in Sagittarius into the end of the year. And there might be this kind of having to negotiate a lot with the issues here. Maybe there are also travel negotiations that are going on, sort of a lot of give and take. And that's because your ruler is now in the third sign. It's still aspected by Mars in your eighth sign. And that's very much about communicating something that is not necessarily that comfortable to communicate, but something needs to be said, perhaps. And the third sign is very Mars-like anyway. And with Mars retrograde in your eighth sign, aspecting or looking at this place, it might bring up some insecurities. It might bring up your partner's insecurities if you have that conversation. And so there is this dynamic going on now where you have to engage with this in some way that hopefully, ideally, is more helpful for both of you. And even if you're not in a relationship, a romantic relationship, it's how you relate and how you communicate with anyone, and even with yourself. The third house is just as much about how we communicate with ourselves, the voice in our head, as much as anything else. So there is a full moon on the 8th, and it's exactly conjunct Mars in your 8th, with, of course, the sun opposite. So it's at 21 degrees of Taurus, the sun at 21 degrees of Scorpio. And this is now a time to find more balance between these two considerations, your um, financial life in terms of, again, your own finances and other people's finances or joint finances held with your partner. How do you engage with all of these things, as well as family dynamics, your family and their family, or any other person's family that you're engaging with now? And that comes down to essentially values, whether it's money, family. These are the things that we're taught to value by our family, money primarily. But beyond money, beyond finances or resources of any kind, in fact, this is the core issue is values. And self-worth is also another core issue here with values, self-value, valuing yourself, but also valuing others. And this full moon is asking you to really get a balance right between thyself and others' values. And so it's exactly conjunct Mars, like I said, and Mars is retrograde. And so this means that Mars is exactly opposite the sun. That means it's the exact midpoint of the Mars retrograde. So it's kind of reached this kind of culmination point for this full moon in a way, all of these tricky dynamics that you're playing with, and again, finances or whatever it might be. Intimacy issues as well as a big part of eighth house, and change and unexpected change at that. So Mars retrograde conjunct the full moon is that midway point, and understanding the journey now that you're on, and understanding any journey when you're at the midpoint, it feels like, okay, I'm halfway through this, but you still have to go the other half. And to be open and mindful about that, the changes that still must occur, the reassessment that has to take place with you and your partner around jointly held resources, finances, all of that. So that's the full moon. It is in a very auspicious lunar mansion, Rohini. It's a very luxurious lunar mansion as well. But again, Mars retrograde is just creating some issues around that. So there might be, on the one hand, a possibility of overindulging, even sexually. That's the eighth house, or indulging in other ways financially. And then, there's an issue there with Mars retrograde, of course, and it's asking you to maybe just slow down with that impulse, take a step back and reassess and consider your actions around this time, I would say. So that's the full moon. Let me bring it forward and we can see how the moon begins to wane then. And I'll show you the new moon at the end of the month before Christmas, right before Christmas, couple of days before the 25th. We have the new moon on the 23rd of December in Sagittarius. And that's where we have your ruler Venus, and Mercury has moved through the whole sign as well. So third house is very much about going for something you want, communicating what you want, being clear about what you want, first of all. And it's very much a sexual house as well. So when we consider Mars's retrograde continuing in your eighth house, which is again maybe a deeper aspect of sexuality and the psychological component, as well as the, emotional and physical intimacy the eighth house represents, there obviously is a lot of dynamics going on here in terms of being intimate with somebody else. So this new moon in your third, whether it's actual intimacy in terms of sexuality or whether it's just communicating something more intimate. This is an important consideration here. And communicating your truth and being clear about what is true, because the third sign for you, Libra, is Sagittarius, which is all about truth. And although Sagittarius is more so about the ninth house in a way, it's conducive to that in terms of the higher mind and teaching and people who advise you. The third house is about you figuring it out on your own. So you might have all the teachers and advisors that you want, but it's really more about figuring these things out on your own and communicating something at this point. So this new moon in your third sign, in the root star sign called Mula in the lunar mansions, is very much about getting to the root, getting to the core issues, getting to the truth, basically. And again, communicating that truth and thinking about this now for the new lunar phase coming up after this 23rd of December is an important one. Jupiter, which rules this new moon, is now moving forward in your sixth sign. And so it's about connecting with your everyday life and everyday tasks that on one hand might be a bit sort of mundane or boring or even arduous, but Jupiter is still about you connecting with those things in a more meaningful and purposeful way and finding meaning in the everyday. So that's the Jupiter moving forward for this new moon. And at the end of the month, I'm going to just highlight one other thing, and that is the very end of the month. Mercury moves from your third into your fourth by the 28th. But then on the 29th, it stations retrograde and goes back on the 31st on New Year's Eve into Sagittarius as the Venus, your ruler, has crossed over. So you can see here they both meet by exact degree again on the 30th. And then Venus then meets with Pluto as Mercury retrogrades back. This is a bit complicated by the end of the year and into the new year. So around New Year's Eve is quite complex. Mercury retrograde in your third house, I would highly advise you to, well, I shouldn't tell you what to do, but I wouldn't travel if that were me. With the Mercury retrograde in my third house, I just wouldn't travel. If I were to travel, I would certainly expect perhaps, or maybe not expect, but at least be prepared for delays. And this is what's already forecast anyway by strikes that are possible in certain parts. Even if there aren't a strike, it's just when you combine a Mars retrograde aspecting a Mercury retrograde in your third house, if there aren't travel issues, I'll be very surprised. But it's not just about travel. Third house is very much about communication. So Mercury retrograde now into the end of the month and in the new year is very much about you reconsidering and reflecting upon how you communicate. And again, it's about communicating your truth. So as this happens, your ruler Venus conjoins with Pluto by the end of the year and into the new year. And there's a real need to kind of expose something here or reveal something and get to the core issues here. And that's an ongoing thing that I'll talk about more in January. So Libra, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time, hello Scorpio. This is a forecast for Scorpio rising and or moon sign for December 2022. So Scorpio, your ruler Mars continues to retrograde in Taurus, your seventh whole sign. This is very much about relationships. And it has been helped out more recently because Venus has been moving through your sign and continues to move through Scorpio until the 5th of December. So there's a lot of advantage to be taken from here that you would have experienced in November and now leading into the first week of December. And this exchange between the 1st and the 7th is very much about compromise with your partner, with any other, and this kind of negotiation that can take place. Because otherwise, other than that, Mars retrograde in your seventh house could lead to a lot of frustrations with other people in general, and especially your partner. So that's something to be mindful of for the long term because Mars continues to retrograde in Taurus as Venus actually moves into the next sign on the 5th of December into your second sign. So let me bring it back here. Whoops, I went too far. I want to go day by day. So here on the 5th, we have Mercury has moved in on the 3rd of December, and Venus then moves in on the 5th. This is a bit complex because they both move over this juncture between Scorpio and Sagittarius initially, and then they kind of move in and out of each other's degree. Then from the beginning to the end of the month, they come back together again by the end of the month. And so this kind of having to negotiate these two spheres of life, love and money, for example, are two things that Venus and Mercury represent. But any kind of business negotiations or things like that, and especially money, because of course this is your second sign. So there might be things to negotiate here with your partner, in other words. And because now Mars is no longer exchanging or kind of playing nice in a way, there's potential here for Mars and its aspect on Venus. It's got an 8th house aspect on Venus, Mars. So it might create some issues here in terms of, maybe a sharp word here or there, or maybe more than that. So just being mindful of that when you are negotiating with other people in general, as well as your partner, anything financially, I would say, or any kind of family dynamics at all also. So that's Mars. And Mars is going to continue to retrograde in your 7th sign, and it's kind of reaching a culmination point by the 8th of December because it's a full moon exactly conjunct Mars at 21 degrees with the sun at 21 degrees of your sign. So obviously this is a sort of a culmination, a kind of climactic point in this whole Mars retrograde thing. So by the 8th of December, being really mindful of your relationships and how you relate in general. It is, like I said, the midpoint, so it's only halfway through it. And then because the full moon conjoins it in your 7th sign, although in a very passionate sign, Rohini, which itself could be very, well, passionate, there obviously is the pitfalls of that, of overdoing it and being overly passionate in terms of even it spilling out into some problem. Now, as long as you're mindful of that, you can negotiate here, which is basically a negotiation between you and the other or any other in any instance, not just about your romantic relationships. So definitely a full moon to enjoy though on the 8th with Rohini here, a very auspicious lunar mansion and a very luxurious and comforting and enjoyable lunar mansion, a very sensual one. So there's a lot to enjoy here again, as long as you might just be mindful of not overdoing it, overindulging. So moving forward, then we have the moon wane throughout the month, and then I'll show you the new moon, which occurs in Sagittarius on the 23rd. So a couple of days before Christmas, we have a new moon, and it's in Sagittarius in the lunar mansion Mula, the root. Literally, that's what Mula means, root star sign. And so it's about getting back to roots, but also very much about getting back to whether it's family roots and all of that, as is many the case for this time of year, people connecting with family again. But it's also beyond that. It's about connecting with your own roots in a spiritual sense and connecting with the truth of who you really are. That's second sign Sagittarius, and communicating that to yourself and to others, to be very clear about that, to understand what's important in your life and to remove anything that's not important, because Mula is very much about removing things as much as it is about planting new things. You can think about a gardening kind of metaphor fitting in really nicely here with Mula and root. Thinking about roots, uprooting things, pulling the roots up and weeds up and planting new ones. So it's very much about planting new beliefs and possibilities here and seeing a potential or possibility here where you might not have seen before. But again, only by removing any kind of the weeds, the negative thoughts and all of these things that really just kind of clog the mind anyway and don't really help anyone. So the fact that Jupiter is itself moving forward, which rules the new moon in Sagittarius on the 23rd, and it's moving forward in your 5th, this is a very auspicious time, I would say, for you overall. And Jupiter's aspect to your sign from your 5th sign is about reconnecting to something that really gives you a sense of hope moving forward. 5th sign is very much about that. So really reconnecting to something, I would say, that gives you hope and meaning, and then speaking that very clearly and literally maybe even speaking the words, what is it? Because that second sign, you might be able to connect with it more if you actually say it out after this new moon. So then I'll just bring it to the end of the month. I want to show you another key dynamic that's going on, and that is Venus and Mercury are coming back together again. And so they're kind of dancing beside each other a lot. And there's obviously therefore a lot of things to negotiate throughout this whole period. But Mercury moves into Capricorn on the 28th. and then it's going to station on the 29th. And as it stations, it then moves retrograde and back into Sagittarius as Venus moves into Capricorn. So they're swapping signs here. So by New Year's Eve, we have a Mercury retrograde in your second sign, and we have Venus move into your third sign, conjunct Pluto. So some tricky dynamics here to negotiate here in terms of communicating your truth, going for what you want, understanding the blocks that are in the way of getting what you want, and reassessing how you communicate that as well, because of course then Mercury continues to retrograde into January. So the new year is very much about reflecting on your truth and communicating that. I'll talk more about that in January, of course. It's an important time as Mars continues to retrograde through the mid-January point. There's a lot of things to reconsider here into the new year for you, Scorpio. And again, especially in relationships and in family dynamics and all of that, and in values and what you value, and looking at how you might reflect and review those things, and that having an impact on your financial life, and how that has an impact on your partner and relations in general as well, and enjoyments. And there is a lot of things to enjoy here as well, considering again the Jupiter moving forward in your fifth house here, and reconnecting not just to enjoyable things, but also more meaningful things. So Scorpio, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. Hello, Sagittarius. This is a forecast for Sagittarius rising and or moon sign for December 2022. So Sagittarius, your ruler Jupiter has now stationed direct from the end of November, and it's now starting to move forward in your fourth house, in the home environment, in the sphere of happiness and relations with those at home, parents as well, including especially the mother, if she's still alive. But this sense of happiness and home and security and time spent at home, enjoying that and connecting with it also, or with them, or just being on your own at home is a very nice indication here of Jupiter in your fourth house moving forward. So there's a definitely a sense of enjoying, or the potential for enjoying that, and to connect with that more deeply in December as Jupiter continues to move forward. Now, all of the planets that have lined up in your 12th house and after the new moon in your 12th house by the end of November are actually now moving into your sign. So I'll show you how that pans out now in the coming days. So on the 3rd, Mercury moves into your sign. And then on the 5th, Venus moves into your sign. By mid-month, the 16th, Sun moves into your sign also. So before we get there, I'll just show you the full moon in Taurus. But what it means is that there's going to be a lot of activity in your life in this period. And, I imagine a lot of mostly welcome activity as well. Relations, people at work, this time of year is a time for more festivities and all of that, even with people you work with, and just in general. And then just having a good time. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't things, to negotiate here, because a continuing Mars retrograde in your sixth sign, aspecting these planets in your first sign, and a full moon in your sixth sign, there are things to kind of work out right now, and challenges that you might have to overcome with, for example, coworkers, or anyone you perceive as someone who's a competition, or even an enemy. You might even label them as someone who you don't like. And Mars retrograde in this space is asking you to really look within yourself and to see that actually it's all an inside job, and it's all your own inner demons that need to be tackled with now. Um, so that's Mars continuing to retrograde in your sixth sign, aspecting Venus and Mercury, and then eventually the Sun in your sign by mid-month. But first, I want to show you this full moon on the 8th, because it's exactly conjunct Mars, opposite exactly the Sun, because it's a full moon. So this is actually Mars opposite Sun is the midway point in the Mars retrograde cycle. So we're halfway through the Mars retrograde. It's moving through your sixth sign. It's about, reconsidering how you approach your problems, your everyday tasks, and again, other people, especially if you work with other people. This is something to be really mindful of. Now that Venus itself, which rules Mars, is now in your sign, and Mars is aspecting. So it might be something that's impacting you greater at this time, thinking about people you work with, as well as friends that you have as well, or groups that you hang around with, or even just on a bigger kind of social dynamic, like even in your community. This is an important dynamic to really be mindful of any kind of hidden angst that you're not allowing out, and that can, be projected outward, not consciously, of course, onto other people, and then have a problem with another person. So that's Mars retrograde in your sixth house. Again, it's a time to really focus on your inner strengths and overcoming any problems in yourself so that you don't allow them to become problems with other people. This is a full moon in your sixth sign, like I said. So it's in a very auspicious lunar mansion, Rohini, a very luxurious and comforting and sensual, enjoyable lunar mansion, but it is your sixth house. So it's about, enjoying the everyday as well, enjoying perhaps also overcoming problems. You might have an issue that you've been dealing with, and this time might be this kind of culmination point where you can get the sense of being able to overcome it. Mars is certainly a very strong planet when retrograde, but and in the sixth house, it's very capable of overcoming those issues. So it's just that, you have to maybe approach it differently. You have to maybe think about it differently and reassess the problem. So that's the full moon in your sixth house. Let's move it forward and on. And as we continue the waning cycle throughout the rest of the month, on the 16th, the sun moves into your sign, and it's very much a time to, recharge for the year ahead. Your ninth lord in your first sign, and it being the sun itself, is a really important recharge for the whole year from mid-December to mid-January. And to connect with something that charges you really, that's more meaningful and purposeful. And I would even say, in terms of like most people who would not even see the inside of a church throughout the year, might connect with that now. Even if you don't go to church, even if you don't believe in that organized religion, it's more about connecting with what you do believe in and allowing that to recharge you, to fuel you up. So that's the sun moving through your sign. It's a very rejuvenating time, or potentially a very rejuvenating time. So let me keep it on the sign Sagittarius here, and I want to show you the new moon on the 23rd. So a couple of days before Christmas, the moon joins the sun's degree at 7 degrees of Sagittarius, the lunar mansion Mula, which is the root star sign, Mula meaning root. And it's about, again, connecting with your own roots as well, but more so from a spiritual point of view, because the sun is your ninth lord, moon is your eighth lord. Coming together in your first house, you're really wanting to clear any kind of, thoughts that are not helpful and get to the root. And that means also getting to the root of your beliefs, that where are your beliefs coming from, your core beliefs. And thinking about that, being more clear about that, and allowing that to be what recharges you and fuels you and energizes you. What do you sense your purpose is? And from that sense, with the moon then joining the sun being more of that sense of, that more meaningful pursuit, the moon then joining the sun can be a reset for you, and in clearing out anything that is not helpful in you attaining that ideal situation. So a new moon in your first sign, obviously it's an important time of the year, not just this month, but in the whole year, to really connect with yourself and to start again in many ways. So in the following few days, just to highlight this quite complex dynamic that's going on, we have Mercury first move into Capricorn on the 28th. Then we have it stationed on the 29th, and then Venus on the 30th move into your sign, Capricorn, the second sign, as Mercury moves back by New Year's. So you can see here they're swapping signs. So they're kind of jostling around here for a while, Venus and Mercury. So obviously relations at home and also at work, especially, you need to be mindful of these around this period into the new year, because of the dynamics involved, the relationship and career dynamics and all of that involved here. And any kind of travel plans, I would be highly, you know, I would not necessarily advise you to travel at this time. I wouldn't advise anyone to be traveling around New Year's, because it's likely to be chaotic with a Mercury retrograde and then aspected by a Mars retrograde. And, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily plan it exactly on New Year's Eve. If you have to travel around that time, that's fine, but make sure that you pack plenty of patience, because there's likely to be delays going on here. And thinking about anything in terms of financial dynamics, family dynamics, and all of these things as they go back and forth over your first and second sign. Obviously this is the time to be with family, as it is for many people, but also to think about finances around this time and into the new year. It's a bit complicated around New Year's, to say the least. So just be mindful of that and being patient with any outcomes. So, Sagittarius, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. Hello, Capricorn. This is a forecast for Capricorn rising and or moon sign for December 2022. So, Capricorn, your ruler Saturn is now moving forward. It has finally finished out its retrogrades in your sign over the last couple of years. It will now start to move forward and out of your sign by the new year, by the 17th of January. But there still is another month and a half to experience Saturn as it finishes up, maybe wraps up some things or ties up some loose ends in your sign, and how this impacts you personally and how you communicate and how you relate and how you work and the work that you do are all the things that have been impacted in the last few years. And again, maybe taking this opportunity to tie up some loose ends here, or just to even just look at the changes that have occurred and that you're kind of finishing out this phase now with Saturn then moving forward in the new year. It might be a good time in December to take an opportunity to kind of just look back on those as you move forward, though, because it is a Saturn moving forward. So it's not necessarily about going back. But there are things that are going back, of course, and we'll start with the Mars retrograde, then followed by a Mercury retrograde to consider. So the Mars retrograde continues in your fifth sign, and by the full moon on the 8th, if I show you this here, we have a full moon conjunct by exact degree the Mars retrograde. So that means that Mars is exactly opposite the Sun in your 11th sign. So Capricorn, this is very much a culmination point and a kind of climactic point in terms of, the things that you would love to do. The fifth sign is very much about, and the 11th sign, very much about planning a future and the things that you would love and hold dear and close to you as well. Those people that you hold dear and close to you, whether it's children, lover, anyone, anything, or anything you do. Also, the fifth sign is very much about spiritual practices. So this full moon obviously would be a great time to reconnect with that. And because it's exactly conjunct a Mars retrograde, there are complexities here. And this being the midway point in a Mars retrograde, as everything comes to a head here in a way, just reflecting on that, maybe not necessarily acting upon it, maybe responding to what needs to be responded to in the moment, but not necessarily creating new issues around what are potentially some issues here because Mars is retrograde. So thinking about what you would love to do and who you really would like to connect with and your bigger ambitions and how that plays out in your fifth house and with those kinds of relationships, this is a time to I would say, step back a little bit around this because a full moon could definitely lead to heightened emotions around the topics. And although it's in an auspicious lunar mansion, Rohini, a very enjoyable lunar mansion, a very passionate one. Sometimes passions, when conjunct Mars, can lead to problems like arguments. So that's something to be mindful of with, again, those close and dearest to you, but also friendships because the Sun opposite and Mars is opposition to your Sun in the 11th house, thinking about friend circles and all of that. 11th house is also about your higher aspirations, your ambitions, your bigger goals in life, and thinking about those things is important too. But you'll see here as well a dynamic that's occurring after this full moon now, more so with the Sun now also moving into Sagittarius. On the 3rd, we have Mercury move into Sagittarius, and then on the 5th, we have Venus. And then by mid-month, we have the Sun all move into Sagittarius, your 12th sign. So it's this transition now from your 11th to your 12th. And so Mars, which is continuing to retrograde until the 12th of January, continues this impact in your fifth house, and maybe not being able to see a clear plan how you're going to move forward, or even if you do plan it, the steps aren't very clear as such as yet. But now that Mars is having an aspect onto the Sun, Venus, and Mercury all in your 12th sign, again, that is maybe not being able to clearly see a way forward in terms of these things, the steps that are required. And especially by the end of the month, Mercury then stations retrograde in your sign and goes back into your 12th sign retrograde for the month of January. So it might not be clear at all how you can move forward in a kind of practical sense. But yet still this time in December and January is a time to really reflect upon these things. So let me show you the new moon, which occurs in your 12th sign, in the sign Sagittarius on the 23rd. So this is at 7 degrees of Sagittarius in the lunar mansion Mula, the root star sign. It's about connecting to your roots in a spiritual sense, in your 12th house especially. And as Venus and Mercury play it out here and jostle it out really for space here as they move into your sign in the coming days, it's an important time to really connect with that sort of beyond the sort of trivial and the kind of mundane everyday stuff and the details, if the details especially are not clear, and to really reconnect with your purpose and allowing that to be a sort of thing that rises from your subconscious, even maybe being open to signals from your dream state, 12th house, maybe sitting and in silence more in meditation. That's 12th house, maybe letting go and surrendering into it a little more around this new moon, especially on the 23rd of December leading up to Christmas. And also because at this time Jupiter, which is ruling this new moon, is now moving forward throughout December and picking up pace more again in the sign Pisces in the third house. That is, though, despite that 12th house and needing to really reconnect within and what you need to let go of perhaps at this time to start again. Jupiter moving through your third house is very much about connecting with other people, whether in your local area or with siblings and all of that dynamic going on. And that's Jupiter in the third. So there is definitely something more meaningful possible in terms of connecting with other people at the same time. And maybe that's what's fueling it as well, in terms of if you've really deeply connected with yourself and released any blocks and surrendered anything that you need to at this time, that might feel like then an easier time to actually connect with other people. That sense of, when you are completely okay with being on your own and you don't have a sense of asking anything of anyone else, then it's likely you're able to connect more deeply and more meaningfully with other people because you're not asking anything of them. So that might be a signature of this new moon also for you, Capricorn. And then let me show you the dynamics that kind of finish out the month, which are a bit tricky because by the 28th, we have Mercury move into your sign, but very briefly, just for a couple of days, because then by the 29th, it stations retrograde in the first degree, conjunct Venus in the first degree of your sign on the 29th. And then Venus moves on, and then Mercury moves back, retrograde back into your 12th sign. So this back and over between your sign and your 12th sign, there's this obviously this give and take that has to happen, this kind of back and forth as well around some details around New Year's Eve. If you have any plans to travel long distance, I would be very patient around any plans. Not necessarily expect delays, but certainly be prepared for them. Um, in your everyday life and maybe business things and all of that. But Mercury especially rules foreign travel, especially as the ninth lord now in your 12th house of foreign travel, retrograde, and then aspected by Mars, and a retrograde Mars at that. I would definitely be, patient with this New Year period, I would say. But then as we move into January, I'll talk more about it in January as Venus moves through your sign. That's a very beneficial transit for you. And Mercury, yes, is going to continue to retrograde in January, with Mars also until mid-January, that is. So there are complexities in terms around the details again, but there's definitely something enjoyable and again more meaningful to connect with at this time. So Capricorn, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. Hello, Aquarius. This is a forecast for Aquarius rising and our moon sign for December 2022. So, Aquarius, Saturn has started to move forward in your 12th sign, and it is now finishing up in your 12th sign after a couple of years, nearly 3 years, in fact, and will finish in January on the 17th in your 12th sign of loss, of endings, of cleaning the slate and starting over. And so December really into January is a time for finishing up anything and tying up any loose ends and starting again. And so this is an important time to consider that restart really in your life and this starting over, and considering what it is that needs to be let go of in order for you to do that. Thinking about expenses and expense in the last few years, especially, and things that have ended perhaps in your life, and new beginnings and all of that are big themes, of endings and new beginnings with Saturn. At the same time, Rahu continues to move through your third sign with Uranus, and they're very like each other, Rahu and Uranus. And in your third sign, it's very much about going for something you want. So there is something important here to communicate, first of all, what you want, but be clear about that. Sometimes Rahu isn't clear about things, of course, and it shows this kind of hidden dynamic, this shadow aspect. And understanding that shadow self, if you will help you understand what it is that you truly want, even if it's maybe seems like inappropriate to other people. It's important to understand what you want yourself. And because Saturn now is finishing up in your 12th sign and moves into your sign in January, they're in a more helpful relationship with each other from the 17th of January. So again, thinking about this time, taking advantage of December in a way of finishing things and then moving on into the new year, starting again in a more helpful way. I think there will be more help for you in order to make some new starts, some fresh new starts in January 2023. So December is kind of setting it up for you in a way, in that way. All of these planets that have gathered in your 10th house, your career space, including the sun until mid-December. So from mid-November to mid-December, this is really lighting this up. So you might have become more prominent or more visible in your career space, more things to enjoy and connect with, more networking potentially, with Mercury and Venus also, two very important planets here in terms of how you engage with the world around you, all in your 10th house. Opposite Mars, which continues to retrograde in your 4th house. So there's a lot of things to reassess in your home life and your setup at home as, career takes off perhaps at this time. So that's something to consider. And what's going to happen in the coming days is that, first of all, Mercury moves signs into your 11th and then followed by Venus on the 5th. And so the sun will join them then on the 16th. So basically, it's this transition from your 10th to your 11th. It's about networking, certainly, but it's also about earnings. It's about what you gain from what you do, whether it's the work you do or anything you do, any action that you take. This emphasis now on your 11th sign will be very prominent, and especially because we're having a new moon on the 23rd here. But before we get to the new moon, let's talk about the full moon on the 8th. It's quite an intense one, but it could be intensely good, intensely passionate. And that is because it's a full moon exactly conjunct Mars, which is retrograde, and it's in the lunar mansion Rohini, which is the very enjoyable, very comfortable, luxurious, even very sensual lunar mansion in Taurus. So that means that all of those are potential. But with Mars retrograde, it could also lead to frustration if you're not getting your needs met or you don't feel like you're getting your needs met. This is in the 4th house. So there's a home situation going on here that's potentially leading to some frustration, perhaps. At the same time, this is the midway point in the Mars retrograde cycle because Mars now on this full moon on the 8th is exactly opposite the sun. So this is the midway point for the Mars retrograde. So it's a culmination point in many ways around the issues here, around the home and the changes that are having to happen in your home and your family life, perhaps as well, in your home life, but also, how you balance that with career objectives and all of that. So that's the full moon in Rohini. Again, like I said, a potentially very enjoyable one for sure. Now, there are complexities, like I said, continuing because Mars continues to retrograde in your 4th house and then continues to aspect the sun, but also as it continues then into your 11th sign and the planets here in your 11th sign. So you're having to think about, well, what makes me happy anyway, and how do I get what I want, and what do I want? And thinking about these bigger objectives with the 11th sign is important. So the sun then moves into your 11th on the 16th, and then the moon joins it on the 23rd. So this is let me bring it back to your sign, the new moon. It's at 7 degrees of Sagittarius in the lunar mansion called Mula, meaning root. So it's the root star sign. It's all about getting to the root cause, removing anything that is not true, because it's all about seeking truth in the sign Sagittarius, which is all about truth, your truth. And so with all these planets here now in the new moon, this is a time to really connect with what is true and what you can actually gain from what is true. And when you're very clear about what is true, you're more likely to gain more out of the situation. Now, although Mars continues to retrograde and aspect these planets and this new moon, in your fourth house, there obviously is, again, all of that shifting around or moving around and changing around in your home environment. But that itself can lead to an inquiry, and understanding, what you're doing in your life in general, but again, in your home and work life, especially, and how you go about getting what you want. And maybe at this time, how you have to reassess how you get what you want as well, and how you communicate what you want. And again, thinking about what's true, because when you're more clear about what's true, you're more able to communicate what you want, and what's truthful and more meaningful to you. So, as Jupiter, which rules this new moon, is moving through Pisces now and it's moving forward and moving on after its retrograde, there's more clarity in moving forward with these bigger plans and these higher objectives, especially these bigger ambitions, and how you can maybe even, channel that into making more money, more earning, all of that, because Jupiter is in your second sign, literally. Whether this is your rising sign, Aquarius, or moon sign, I think either of those would be beneficial in terms of finances and increasing your financial outlook and portfolio and all of that. And especially then also as the 11th Lord moving forward. So this new moon might be a time to kind of reset some intentions around these kind of financial matters as well, right before Christmas. So the last thing is to mention this kind of tricky dynamic that's going on by the very end of the month, and that is the 28th, we have Mercury move into your 12th sign, and then on the 29th, Venus. But Mercury stations on the 29th, retrograde, and then on the 31st, slips back into Sagittarius. So this dance between the 11th and 12th, in other words, let me bring it forward so we can have it in your sign. There's a dance between your 11th and 12th, which is very much about give and take, gains and losses, earnings and expense, dreams and surrender. All of these themes of the 11th and 12th are very highlighted here. And especially with Mercury now retrograding in your 11th sign, thinking about what your higher ambitions are, in fact, into the new year, continuing with Mars retrograding into your fourth, and happiness and home and all of that. There's a lot to reconsider into the new year in January. And it's not necessarily a very clear cut way forward initially, at any rate, but it is a time to get clear about it and to reassess these things. So, Aquarius, I hope that's been helpful. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. Hello, Pisces. This is a forecast for Pisces rising and or moon sign for December 2022. So, Pisces, your ruler Jupiter has now started moving forward after its retrograde ended by the end of November. And so now you can probably get a sense of things moving forward in terms of your own personal self and your plans, the direction your life is taking. Maybe there's more clarity that can be afforded you now, more opportunities coming your way, as your first and 10th Lord Jupiter can show that. And we have a new moon in your 10th house, in fact, by the end of December on the 23rd, right before Christmas. So there is a potential here for being clear or getting clear, or going through a process of getting clear, at least, of your career objectives and the actions that you ideally would take now. And Jupiter, of course, is all about ideals, the ideal situation, and a very personal situation. And this could be a potentially very positive thing as you look for opportunities and growth and expansion around this Jupiter direct station. So December, should feel like things are starting to move forward, in other words. Now, Saturn still aspects and has been aspecting and dealing with Jupiter for many years now. And there might still be this kind of container, which might sometimes feel too contained and maybe too constricted. But at the same time, if you use that container as an ability to focus, so if you see things as not being possible, certain things, then using what is possible and focusing on that is more helpful in the long term. So that's Jupiter moving forward in Pisces. There are other things, of course, not moving forward, including especially Mars retrograde in your third sign. And by the end of December, we'll also have Mercury moving back in your 10th sign of work and continue to be aspected by Mars. So all these planets that have lined up in your 9th sign, including the Sun for the first couple of weeks of December, Venus and Mercury just for the first few days, there's a transition that continues now into December from your 9th to your 10th house. And starting out with, the 9th is very much about beliefs, what you believe is possible, and then moving into the 10th. And then when you are clear about what's possible, then you're more likely to take affirmative action. But again, with Mars retrograde in your third, being retrograde, aspecting these planets, it might not be very clear in how you can go about doing that. You might get clear about things, but then you might not, feel the energy or impetus to move forward on these right now with Mars retrograde. You might second guess yourself or hesitate to take action with Mars retrograde in your third. And that's something to be mindful of. Now, also, third is about communication and travel. And so, thinking about these things and thinking about your energy and your confidence in doing any of those things and communicating, with any other person, interacting, socializing, all of these things will be, considered here with Mars retrograde. There might be some frustrations or setbacks in terms of traveling, especially. And that's more especially the case from the end of the month, New Year's, where Mercury stations retrograde as well. So let's bring it forward. I want to show you first how Mercury is the first to move from your 9th to your 10th on the 3rd. Then on the 5th, Venus moves into your 10th, really highlighting that more prominent place in your chart, the, again, area of career. And then by mid-month, the sun moves in as well. But before then, I want to show you the full moon, and that's on the 8th. So a full moon in your 8th at 21 degrees of Taurus, it's exactly conjunct Mars at 21 degrees of Taurus, retrograde Mars, opposite Sun at 21 degrees. This is a culminative point, a sort of climactic point in a way of this whole Mars retrograde phase. So considering the 3rd and 9th houses, especially now with this full moon, things kind of coming to a head here in terms of how you communicate, how effectively you do that or not. Thinking about how you get what you want, how you go about that. That's 3rd house. Thinking about your ability, your energy, your confidence in getting that. Full moon in Rohini, the lunar mansion here in your 3rd house, tends to be a more enjoyable one, a very passionate one. But sometimes Mars combined with that, especially retrograde, could lead to frustrations if you can't get what you want or even say what you want. So thinking about these things around the full moon, but then also thinking about connecting with something more higher minded, you might say, with the 9th house opposite, with the sun, in terms of, well, what is it you want? What is more meaningful and purposeful to you? Um, what is it you want from that higher on up perspective? Instead of more this kind of baser 3rd house is more like maybe egoic perspective where I want. So thinking about that might be more helpful in getting a balance between, well, what do I want actually? And what is it actually that is meant for me in many ways as well? That's another way of thinking about the balance between the 9th house and the 3rd house. 3rd house feels more like a sort of willful place where if you put a lot of effort in, I can make this happen, I can get this thing. But the 9th house is like that higher on up sort of assistance that comes from, you might say, even just the universe, right? So it's like if you're more attuned with that, aligned with actually what's meant for you, you're more likely going to get what you want because on some level you already have asked for what you want. So this dynamic between the 9th and 3rd house will be an important one for the full moon on the 8th of December. Moving forward, then we see the sun as the moon begins to wane. The sun moves into your 10th sign. Let me bring this back so you can see your sign here. 10th sign, Sagittarius, lighting that up in the most prominent place of your chart from mid-December to mid-January. And as we go into January and Mercury will retrograde back into this space, obviously there's a lot of emphasis on your career right now, Pisces. So be really mindful of that and make sure that it's not a negative focus, that it's a refocusing, a review and reassessment instead of trying to push things forward too quickly. With Mars, especially retrograding, continuing to retrograde and aspecting these planets here in your 10th house, whatever it is that you want to achieve right now in your career or in any sphere, really, whatever it is you want to do, be really mindful of using this energy to try and go about it in a different way. Try and get around it or reassess how you approach it. And this is the emphasis now for really the rest of the month and into the new year. So let me show you the new moon then that occurs on the 23rd. So it's a new moon at 7 degrees of Sagittarius in your 10th house, most prominent, most visible place in your chart. So it's again about your prominence as well and your visibility and your need to connect with that and to kind of reset that and your intentions around that. And because this place is Sagittarius for you, then it has to be something meaningful for you to be more visible. It has to be something more meaningful to you for you to be able to be more visible also. But because it's a new moon and Jupiter now moving forward in your sign, there is a potential here for you to become that, to be that. Yes, you have the Mars retrograde kind of again reassessing how you go about getting it, and maybe creating some frustration along the way, but you can still set the intention and reconnect with that more higher on up, more meaningful and purposeful intention along, whatever it is you're doing. And it's whatever you're doing. 10th house is more specifically your career, but it's also just the house of action. What are you doing? So that's the new moon on the 23rd of December, really considering what you're doing and how you're doing it. Then there are a few tricky dynamics going on by the end of the month and into the new year because we have, first of all, let me bring it back to your sign. So here we have on the 28th, we have Mercury move into your 11th sign from your 10th. And then we have Venus on the 29th, but Mercury has stationed retrograde on the 29th, and then on the 31st moves back into your 10th sign. So there's a back and over and a kind of jostling around with these two areas. And the areas are again work and what comes from that and all you gain from that, whether it's monetary or otherwise, what you wish to achieve in anything that you do. And so this is needing to negotiate with what you're doing and what you're getting out of what you're doing, basically. And because Mercury is retrograding now, you have to really reconsider what you're doing and especially how you're going about doing it because of Mars's continued aspect, retrograde from your third. So really considering how you do anything basically into the new year. Be very mindful of traveling, as I'm saying to all signs, at this time around New Year's, because Mercury's retrograde and aspected by Mars retrograde. And because Mars, in your case especially, is, it's your fourth and seventh lord in your 10th house, and then Mars is retrograde in your third house, ruler of your ninth house. This is very much about travel. And I would, not say don't travel, but I would say be prepared if you are traveling around New Year's that there is likely some potential chaos while traveling. So if you can avoid it, avoid it. If you cannot, then just leave plenty of time to set out en route and just be very open to the potential for delays. So that's the forecast for December, Pisces. I hope you found that helpful. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time.